How does embracing our mortality lead to living bigger, bolder, and with more purpose? Is talking about death off limits, or does courageously facing our inescapable expiration date lead to discovering what life is really all about? I'm Morgan Motzinger, and this is the PS We Expire podcast. Each week, we'll unpack insights from psychology, neuroscience, and spirituality to equip ourselves with ways to navigate our inner world and relate to others with more courage and authenticity. Grab your sense of humor, your burning questions, or your very favorite existential crisis. It's time to explore the thrilling and challenging limited time offer we call life.
When I went to college, I actually thought I wanted to do something within leadership. My undergraduate college, Claremont McKenna, is very focused on leadership and is focused on international relations and things like that. And so that's really why I went, because I was interested in that, or being a politician, something with some leadership. And that's really how I got into it, because I had a lot of roles that were within leadership in high school, and I really enjoyed that. But once I got there, I just was sort of diversely getting my studies, and it wasn't until my parents divorced. He lived in Mexico City. We lived in the States. He got sick, and I didn't know it. One of the trips I went back to see him in one of the summers, I arrived to see my dad, who was, very good looking, very, athletic, obviously blue eyes, which is something, Mexico, it's sort of like stands out. See him pick me up in the airport, like in a wheelchair and looking, very thin and kind of pale and debilitated. And I was like, whoa, what's happening? And it really wasn't talked about really what was happening. He really just said, oh, it's a pinched nerve, like let's go see somebody to kind of manipulate the pinched nerve, and just really was not talked about. And I saw my father, really, again, very good looking, always, cologne and well dressed, and, just, really had a lot of pride in his appearance. You know, see him in that state where he was wheelchair bound, where we had to bring him shakes to, to drink. He couldn't walk because he was paralyzed from the waist down. You know, to see him it made me really think that it's so important to give dignity when we're ill, and how the importance of that is. And how, especially, I never experienced that, but, if you're in the hospital, you get stripped of all your decorations, you have no clothes, no perfume, no watch, and you're just in a bare gown that shows half of your butt anyway. And it's really like takes away a lot of dignity that people have. And that state is really vulnerable, really raw and naked. And I just thought it was so important to sort of bring back dignity, to life, to health, to disease. And when I came back from that trip, I then decided I wanted to, go to med school, and I had no idea how to do it. Again, nobody was in medicine. I don't really have mentors. And I decided I'm going to figure this out. So I decided to pursue it at that point. And again, that's sort of how it went. But, and long story short, my dad kind of got pieced together that he had metastatic prostate cancer. So it's something not seen very frequently, because we have screening and things like that. And, it was sort of not talked about because there's such cultural things about, sexuality and prostates and, all this stuff that, in many cultures, but especially Latin, is sort of not talked about. So, it's sort of like a full circle, because I'm a urologist, and I didn't really go into that specialty because of my dad, but, it's sort of relevant, and I'm glad I had to experience that. And in my work every day, when I see men and women, in urology.
So I'm so sorry about your dad. Did he end up passing away then?
Yeah, he passed like probably 3 months later. So he actually passed on my birthday when I was 21. So that's when he passed away, when I turned 21. So it was very short time from the time I saw him in the decline. But it sort of makes sense when your metastatic prostate cancer goes to your spine, that you get paralyzed. I mean, there's not a lot of time. And especially if you're kind of not truly getting treatment. Nowadays, metastatic prostate cancer, you can live with it for a long, long time and have a good quality of life. But if you don't get treatment, and you only do, let's say, more alternative treatments, that many cultures, people just do that only, the outcome may be not so great, when there could have been definitely a role for cure, for like extending life. My dad wasn't that old when he died. He was 64. He's still pretty young, so he could have definitely lived a lot longer with some treatment.
So when you you said that you were always in positions of leadership. And then as you went through that experience with your dad and you noticed how illness and having to be taken care of really removes this element of autonomy, and that you were seeing in that experience that it also removed this layer of dignity that people come to just have as part of their identity, as part of who they are, as how they present to the world. And so from that point, did you see a path towards medicine where you could use your leadership skills to kind of address some of these systematic issues? Or how, I'm curious what the connection was between the comfort that you felt in leadership positions and then also going into medicine to address this idea of how do we bring dignity to illness and aging in particular.
Yeah, that's a great question, and you do ask beautiful questions. They're various very well looked at the nuances. So it wasn't that I thought, okay, I have leadership skills and I'm gonna then change the system. And I find it actually very interesting what leadership means to people and what people think leadership is, because especially in medicine, there's many people with leadership titles, chiefs and department chairs and all these leadership positions, and truly their titles and like the actual leadership skills are not there, but they're given as a title. And sometimes I'm so struck by the fact that there is no leadership, but they have a title. So just because you have a title, like let's say I was president of my school, this, that, of this club, and all these titles, did that really make me a leader? And I think sometimes we get confused that just having the title is going to, say you're a leader. And I think that's just farthest from the truth in many instances. Of course, sometimes, yes, people that are true leaders get the title or become that CEO or become, whatever the role is, or the leader of the movement, things like that. But I do think it's misconstrued how we really put people on these pedestals of leadership when they don't have any skills. But I did not really go into saying like, oh, I'm going to change the system. I just really came to medicine in a different way that a lot of people come. People want to, be the best in, I don't know, surgery. They want to be the best in research and sort of like these titles and like this a little bit of ego, honestly. And I really came to it like, no, I want to like do the human side of medicine. I want to, again, bring that dignity and bring that compassion. And that's kind of why I'm here. I thought we were healers. And I quickly realized, like sometimes there's not a lot of healing. There's a lot of prescribing. There's a lot of diagnosing. There's a lot of like cutting surgery. But sometimes we miss what I think is the most important thing, which is the humans. It is the soul connection. It is just looking at people in their eyeballs and having a deep, meaningful conversation. And I really is like, that's really kind of why I went into it. And especially in some ways, urology. Urology, there's so many things that bring people shame or guilt, or they don't want to talk about, their leakage of urine, their erectile problems, the fact they are having or not having sex, or even like masturbating. I mean, there's so much stigma and, so much cultural stuff embedded in that causes dysfunction that, those are deep conversations, not even if we talk about kidney stones, that, it's still like they're deep conversations. People trust me to tell me things. And whether you're a friend or a coach or a physician or a spiritual leader, like that space where somebody tells you things, it really is sacred. And there has to be a space where you hold that space for them with absolute trust. And many times the trust is has to be done quickly. Like there's not a lot of time. I have to, in few minutes, tell you you're going to have surgery. And, you've never met me and I'm going to tell you I'm going to do surgery, or sometimes you could die. I mean, it's not dramatic, but if you have an infected kidney stone, sometimes you can't. So having to establish that trust quickly, I think that's something humbling to be able to do. And I don't take that lightly. And I think it's a privilege.
So in your practice, as you're establishing trust, I do think that that's probably actually one of the most important qualities to leadership, is to be able to build rapport with people from a place of really caring about them, because I've done some trainings where they talk about like, how do you build rapport with people really quickly? And it comes from this energy of being able to manipulate people, which I just find like so yucky. And
And
that's like the shadow side of it is like, how do I influence people for like my own good? And what I hear you saying is like, how do you influence people for their own good? How do you build rapport with someone so that there's a trust there? Like you said, to be able to discuss the things that in many cultures is so deeply bound up by shame in these conversations about, like you said, anything having to do with like the urinary system or sexuality, like it's so mired in shame. And so I love that you're applying these skills of building trust really quickly with people, really for their own good.
Yeah, I mean, you can't see in the background, but in this picture on this side, maybe I'll move it just so you can see it. I mean, there's a picture of these. It's a photograph underwater, and it's like lifting, one woman lifting the other woman, and I really do think that's how we should all be. We should really be celebrating women, men, and lifting people up. And my really good friend actually yesterday told me like, "Oh, you're in like an elevator." I'm like, "What do you
Hmm.
mean?" Like you lift people up. You sort of like see their gifts or their fears, and you hold that space with compassion and like lift people up. And I really, I think that that's so important for us to learn and do that for each other. And I do agree about the power, like this leadership style that is power over. How can I manipulate you to get you to follow me? And the thing about leadership is that I think where it misses the mark is people or leaders, they don't know their followers. Like you gotta love and know your followers, to truly lead them somewhere. And you of course have to have a vision of where you're taking them, like where are they following to what. But you have to have a vision of what it is, a purpose, and then you gotta know and love so they can lead. And then yes, you gotta sort of like empower them to lead. But leaders also, like when people like follow blindly, like that's not good. When this leader is just saying, yeah, follow me blindly, don't ask questions, don't ask why, don't question my leadership,
Mm.
don't question my purpose. I mean, that's like a dangerous place, even if it starts with a good intention. Whoever followers are, you have to be curious. You have to be like, is that right? Like, are we getting too much this way? Did your hubris, did your ego, did your something just not tilt you a little too far? And that's something important that we miss. And so to truly be a leader and expect people to follow you blindly without questioning, I think that shows that you truly are not a leader. And
Hmm.
I think again the ego gets in the way and people get their head kind of but it's really important quality of a true leader, to be able to accept that and to realize you don't have all the answers. It's sort of like an expert. Is in medicine, oh, we're experts. No, I don't want to be an expert. I want to be a student so I can be humble. You can teach me and not think that I'm better than you are, because I'm not. I'm always learning something. But when we come from this ego, like I'm the expert, I know everything, you lose the opportunity for some true growth.
I'm going to interrupt for a quick second to invite you to download something I just created for you. It's called 6 Ways to Embrace Mortality and Live with More Purpose. These are 6 simple exercises to start to view your life through the lens of your own mortality. And I love these exercises. They're pretty easy to do. One of my favorite ones is a life review meditation. morganmotsinger.com/purpose to download your copy. Okay, back to the show. So how, like I feel like I'm taking a little bit of like a tangent here, but I think it will be resonant with a lot of people. Like in this age of, WebMD and ChatGPT, and like I can put my symptoms into online and find out what I think my own diagnosis is. There's something that comes with that where people start to have a distrust for people who really are, I would say, like have more expertise in areas than other people. And I'm really curious, like how in your position in medicine, do you kind of open the doors for conversation? And I think a lot of fear motivates people to try and find answers to things, especially if they feel like they've been not listened to. If they're coming with their problems and they're, like you said, if it becomes like a cycle of just prescriptions and it's not really solving the problem, I think people become very exhausted by having to like try and figure out their own health stuff. And so I'm curious, like how, especially for someone like you who is interested in listening to people really well and steering them in the right direction, but also like that balance of knowing that you know a lot more than the average bear when it comes to things like urology and then, you know, the larger scape of medicine. How do you manage that?
Yeah, there's so many things I could say. I mean, hopefully, there's so many points that came to mind. I mean, one of them important is, we tend to hear, but we don't listen. When we are talking to somebody else, we're almost just kind of anticipating what we're going to say back, but we truly don't like listen to what is being said. And sometimes when we just kind of slow down and step back and listen, it changes so much when we're not trying to sort of like outdo the person, like I know more, I'm going to tell you, or I'm going to prove my point. And, kind of, sometimes I'm surprised, I'm a surgeon, we do stuff, we do surgery, but so much of what I do is actually like listening to people's concerns, not being heard, not being validated, being dismissed, not truly being listened to. I mean, the patient actually knows all the information. They know their body. So when people tell me I don't think it's that, I'm like, oh, you're probably right. It's probably not that. But sometimes I just still have to check just to make sure for you and I just to feel that, things were checked. But, I have to listen to the patient what they tell me because they know their body better than I do. And so if you dismiss that is quite sad thing to do because it just like it loses the trust. The other thing is, as you said, the balance between people coming from stuff with OMD. I mean, I appreciate that, because sometimes people teach me a lot of things. I'm like, oh, I did not know that was there. Or like, thank you for sharing that website. Like now I can share with my other patients. I did not know that study was there because that patient maybe has a lot more time and investment in their problem they're trying to solve, than I may perhaps, in that moment. So you came with like all kinds of stuff. You spent like hours, 10 hours, like looking the stuff up. And, you can teach me something. And, sometimes I can just sort of steer you and guide you a little bit and be like, okay, well, where did you get that? Or like, that's true, but it was sort of like the wrong organ. Let's say, like I had a patient, and this all comes from fear. And you're absolutely, absolutely right. And half of my job is understanding what people's fear is and addressing that. And once the fear is addressed, then we can have trust. Because everybody comes with a fear that you have cancer, fear that something's wrong, fear that it's going to change your life, fear of how it's going to impact your daily like activity. So you have a fear when you come to see a doctor and come see me. There's always a fear. So understanding what that fear is, acknowledges a person, validates them, and then you can move from like that tension, like to like trust and release, and having the ability to connect. So I had a patient, the son, obviously was very scared, came from like a lot of fear of the dad likely having cancer, which I told from the beginning, this is likely cancer. I just have to diagnose it so we can get the pathology and move to the next steps. And there was a lot of like energy, like not aggressive, but I understood it. It was coming from a lot of fear, and it wasn't directed at me, so I didn't take it personally. But it was very like strong and again a little aggressive. And on the follow-up appointment, he said, well, is there anything else like that can be done? I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, because I recommended surgery. That was like, this needs surgery. He's like, well, what about this other treatment? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, I read that you could do this treatment, like this freezing of this tumor. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, well, I read it, and it says that there's other options, and you're not telling me the options. I'm like, well, but because you actually got the wrong organ, you're absolutely correct. That treatment is for the actual kidney. But what your father has is a cancer within the collecting or the tubes that drain the kidney. So it's completely different. So you were absolutely correct. That would be a great treatment option if it was that type of place of the cancer. But your dad's is different. So I said, please go back and Google this type of cancer, and then you'll see the stuff that I'm talking about and the other options. And I said, thank you for looking that up and for letting me know. I have to like acknowledge that you did this work and that I want to work with you, and that is important to you. So I don't dismiss it, and I appreciate it. And I'm trying to understand where is it coming from. So I think a lot of it is like getting curious. Like I think a lot of people get like they get a little resistant. They start to fight it. Their ego gets flared, and like, well, I know better than you. What are you talking about? No, I'm like, oh, interesting. Where did that come from? Like, where is this question? So when you get curious, again, you sort of like let go of this energy of like, it's me against you, you know more than I do. And it's just like, oh, tell me more. Like, I'm interested. I want to listen to what you're telling me, what you're coming with, your ideas, your thoughts. Those are important. I want to listen to them. And I think that's the difference. Like, we have to be willing to listen and get curious.
I really like what you said about that it's not until you address the fear and that dissipates that trust then is built, because it is true that fear puts us in this state of blocking. It's like, I must protect myself at all costs, and I can't listen to what anybody else is saying until I can get out of this state in my nervous system, until this fear is quelled or addressed, or at least recognized, to say, okay, the fear may not go anywhere, but like, I'm here with you. I'm here with you in the fear. I can hear that getting a cancer diagnosis is terrifying. Everybody is so afraid of the big C, cancer diagnosis, which makes so much sense. So why couldn't we hear the fear, address the fear, and then look at it differently? And it reminds me of like when a toddler's having a temper tantrum, that it like the the worst thing that you can do in that moment is like try and reason with them and be like, this is why you can't have this thing that you're upset about. It's like, no, you just have to be with the toddler in the big feelings first, and then after that is settled, then you can address it from a different perspective and a different part of their brain. And it's funny to me that we think that like as adults that we're somehow not like that toddler, just wearing more socially appropriate attitudes and clothing, when it's still just the same thing, that we're all walking around with our fears on our sleeve and hoping that someone can just be in it with us.
Absolutely. Like, there's this beautiful book, which is one of my favorites, called Permission to Feel. And is from somebody that's in Yale, and has a whole center, I think, of Center of Emotional Intelligence, something like that. And it's absolutely beautiful. And it talks about that. And it actually talks about teaching children in schools these skills, and adults, obviously, of course. And he has something called Ruler. And I forget all of them, but R is like recognize, understand, label. E, I forget. And then R is regulate. So especially with children, this is so important, not just being about like, when children have a tantrum, something's happening, and many times they don't have the verbal knowledge, the words to say like, this is happening. So you kind of have to go down the like list and say, are you hungry? Is it tired? Are you upset? Are you scared? Like, you have to kind of find the emotion until they're like, yeah, it's that one. And then they're like, once you find which one it is, then it's like, oh, okay, like now we found what it is. Okay, like, let's figure out what we can do. Like, let's find not a solution, because you don't have to fix emotions, but okay, what can we do to then, like, address it, the emotion that we just labeled. And again, also regulating it, because emotions, I love emotions. They're like my favorite thing of the whole day. I can talk about them and I just love everything about them. But we have to learn to also regulate them, not have this whole explosion. And that's not about minimizing emotions. No, I don't ever say don't feel that, or you can only be happy. No, but there's a point where it starts exploding, that it's no longer helpful, and we need to, like, just manage it a little bit. But never about dismissing them or saying don't have this, or you should not have this negative emotion and only the happy ones. It's not about that. But if you have children, it really is the best way to kind of diffuse, again, that fear and anger, because they can't communicate. But even as adults, even if we can communicate, we really are in the same place. Absolutely. We have to label that what it is, call it what it is. And like, you got to put a light on that. When you put light on something, like putting the light on the fear, then it's like, oh, everything sort of like changes. But when you leave in the dark and, you don't address that it's fear, no, you don't have to say, oh, I know you're afraid. No, you don't have to say that. But just realizing that's where it's coming from, it really changes the conversation and just the interaction.
Well, I like what you said too about if someone is in this particular instance where he was coming across as very aggressive, like you were able to say, I know that it wasn't about me. I know it wasn't personal, because you can see the emotion underneath that's fueling that. And that is like such an important skill for everyone to have. And I'm really curious about, like, so to be committed to being a physician who is leading with empathy and curiosity and listening to your patients, I would imagine that kind of approach can lead to burnout.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, Yay and nay. I mean, you're right, because when you do sort of, I mean, I'm urology, but I really do like psychourology. I mean, it's
Mm.
not an official term, although some specialties have like psychocardiology, psychodermatology, but there's not a true one yet for urology. But it really is addressing these other things, which again, there's a lot of emotions in it. There's a lot of feelings. People cry in my office all the time, and it's not even cancer. It's just because I address kind of like their trauma or their fear or whatever. So like you pop the balloon and the emotions sort of explode, and it can definitely be draining. I agree. Like there's some days I'm like, oh my god, I need to just lay on the grass or get in the hot tub because was a lot, because you like absorb it, especially if you're an empathetic person, you absorb these emotions. But you have to find ways to protect your energy. And I'm not saying put like a shield. I'm just saying understand like how can you, because empathetic people are kind of like Velcro. They like absorb all of it and they hold on to it and it's not even theirs and it drains them. So there's ways to sort of like let go of the energy that is not yours and realize it's not mine. I need to like cleanse it. And just like we take a shower to get rid of the dirtiness, we have to learn ways to get that energy off of us, and also how to replenish it. Like, what are we doing to refill our cup? And it kind of has to be daily, because again, we get bombarded, in many jobs that are people like jobs. You get all this energy. Like if you're the cashier, you're getting all these people coming in, throwing their anger, throwing their disappointment, and you're just like, I'm just trying to check you out of Costco. So so it's like there's a lot of jobs where like you get all this energy, and you have to learn how to again get rid of the dirty one that is not yours and replenish it. So how can you do that? I mean, there's many ways, but one of the best ones, is, well, to get rid of it. I'll tell you, which are helpful, and again, choose whatever helps you. But movement and exercise is huge. You, by sweating, by getting all that, you are literally getting that energy out of you into like the atmosphere. So anytime you've gone for a run, you always kind of feel better. You go for a walk, you're like, oh, I feel better. And that anger that you had when you got in a fight with your spouse is like, oh, it's not as bad anymore. So you kind of got rid of this energy. You can get into like a salt bath, and not Epsom salt, but like real salt. And by sitting in real salt, I mean, it's like ion exchange, right? So like you get rid of that energy that's not yours. And that's sort of the basis of like when you go in the ocean, or surfers. Surfers, why are they so calm and like happy? I mean, like they're bathing in salt. Like they're not stressed. I don't know any surfer that's like mean and angry. Like they're just not. They're getting their salt bath every day. So salt is a really powerful agent to kind of cleanse all the energy. Exercise, breathing, and that's part of exercise, you're breathing. But like doing some type of breathing or movement, dancing is huge. Put your favorite song on that like pumps you up, that gets you out of that apathy or that gloom or the anger, and just like dance it out. Like you just feel better. So that's just important ways to sort of get rid of it or like kind of elevate it. And then again, how do you replenish it? I mean, a time to be quiet, a time to whatever you call it, prayer, meditation, whatever label you like to use, journaling. That's really important to have that time every day set aside, and really really use it, and not be optional, but be a must. Because
Mm.
again, we just get so bombarded, we get depleted, and you need to like recharge before you keep going.
What was your experience with burnout?
Oh yeah, yeah, that's pretty painful. I mean, I've had it twice and it manifested differently, but the second time I think is the most powerful one and the most important one. You know, because I didn't learn this in med school. I didn't learn the effects of stress, and it's not taught and is not addressed, how important, how powerful stress is. And as a society, we just think, oh, it's just stress. We all live with it. We all have it. How can I not have stress? Well, yeah, and then also that's why you have such rates of high blood pressure and headaches and heart attacks and all this other stuff, because it's all related. And about 80% of all doctor visits are actually stress related. If you come in with your sugar that's not well controlled, well, guess what? Usually it's your stress level making the sugar rise. Your blood pressure. Yeah, what's happening at home? Oh yeah, my car just broke down, or like we can't pay the mortgage. That's going to raise your blood pressure. So instead of me adding 100 meds to fix your blood pressure, let's just address what's happening. And believe me, like the blood pressure is going to go down before I add 5 meds. Um, so it's like you have to realize the effect of stress in every single cell of your body. So I didn't know any of this, but I experienced it firsthand, and I'm so grateful because it taught me so many lessons that are very, very key, not only for me, but to share for others and to better treat my patients. Like, really, I address that and I actually take better care of you. So I had insomnia. My hair was falling out. I lost weight, and there's not a lot to lose. I'm already skinny, so it's really actually not cute, not sexy. It's gross to be so skinny from stress. And some people can get gain weight. I went the other way, but I grinded my teeth terribly. I cracked my tooth. I had got an abscess. Had to have a root canal. I didn't even know what a root canal is. I had to Google this. Like, what is this? Talk about Googling, right? So I'm like, what is this? But root canal. At 42, I developed asthma. How can you develop asthma at 42? But I did because it's an inflammatory state. Asthma is an inflammatory state of the air pipes. So everything is inflamed. Debilitating chest pain. Like I couldn't even walk because I would be like I felt like I was having a heart attack, and I had to have all this testing, echo, and all this tests like monitors, and everything's normal because it's not physical yet. It's just kind of energetic from all this stress. Eventually, it was going to definitely cause damage, but at that point, it still was not causing physical things that are kind of not reversible. But autoimmune stuff, I started getting joint pain, and when they checked my levels of autoimmune markers, rheumatoid factor, it was high. That's an autoimmune disease. And you're basically attacking your own body literally with the stress, just bathing every cell. So nothing gets spared. So that happens to all of us. You get that, reflux, you get the chest pains, your sugar's not controlled, you get bloated, you don't digest well. Why? Well, you're in stress mode. You're in fight or flight. There's no time to digest. You're just bloated, trying to just, whatever happens to the food, it's like, it's not the priority. The priority is survival. Except there's no bear or danger or fire. It's just life. It's just all the things that happen every day, and you don't have the time to stop and decompress. So it's just like a explosion, and it's really, really powerful. And again, I didn't change jobs, I didn't change husband, kids, house. I have the same, and I have no symptoms, like zero, and I sleep like a baby. But so it's like, what changed? Well, it changed what I put my attention to. What am I spending time doing or not doing? That changed. So it's not just like thinking about coaching or changing my thoughts. I mean, that's partly, you have to have some mindfulness, some awareness, but there's a lot to it as well. And a big part of it too for me was purpose. Like, what is my purpose? Just not just being a physician, but like, is there a grander purpose I can help people with? And that's where I founded like a support system for physicians, physician coach support. But it really was about purpose, giving you something to wake up, for the day and look forward to. And that's huge in life. We lose our purpose, we lose our sort of guiding light, and then you get depressed, then you get anxious, then you no longer have joy for the day because you don't have a purpose. So it's just about finding what your purpose is, and it doesn't have to be grand. It just could be like saving the chickens. I don't know, something you're passionate about. So just having just being the best mom, that is a great purpose. You don't have to get crazy. Like, everybody's purpose is important. Everybody's here for a purpose, and it's not a competition like yours is better than mine. It just is. Like, find that one and honor it and listen to your intuition and follow it.
So when you were dealing with all those symptoms, and it sounds like you went through the medical system to try and address and figure out like what is happening. At what point did you connect the dots where you were like, oh, this might actually be because of stress instead? Like, how did you come to that realization? Then what did you do next?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's kind of funny because, yeah, my doctor, I mean, he could have said, like, hey, I think this is stress. Like, do you think that there could be stress? I'm like, I would have been like, oh, maybe. Like, but like, it was never even like in the horizon. He just like, oh, go here, go to this test. And again, we all do that because we don't understand it. So I'm not blaming him. I mean, like, we all do whatever we can with the tools we have. And again, if somebody came to me before, I would have been like, yeah, go here. I don't know, go there. I don't know, because I didn't know. So it wasn't coming from the medical establishment telling me it's stress, lady. Like, that's what you got. But it was about, after I got all this tests, I'm like, I'm getting nowhere. Then it's like, well, I'm going to read. And actually, I was like, always loved reading. And I hadn't read like kind of for fun for a long time. And I just started like diving into reading, like understanding. Like, I think the first kind of book I read was like Buddha's Brain, explaining sort of what's happening in my nervous system to cause all these symptoms. They're physical symptoms. So when there's stress, what's happening to my brain, what's happening to my body, what's happening to everything. And I just started to read it and like try to understand what the hell's happening because nobody was telling me really. And then it really kind of dove more into more of a spiritual thing. And again, it sort of got tied to purpose. Like, what's my purpose? But then I, got into like meditation. I never meditated, and I'm not religious. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And but then I did like a coaching for like meditation coaching, and I learned about meditation and what it does and how it can help. And I'm not saying you should meditate. I'm just saying have some quiet time, prayer, journal, whatever works for you. But I had to like kind of dive more into it because it wasn't just change my thoughts, but it's like, why would you change thoughts? And then to me, again, in my personal opinion, is like if you base it on something really important, which is love, which is purpose, that's what kind of God is, or whatever you call it, light, universe, whatever, so it has to be rooted in that to guide your thoughts, to guide your actions and your results. So it's not just like, oh yeah, I'm going to change it because I'm going to be rich or something. No, I want to have those thoughts. I want to have those actions that are based on something really important, which is love. And that's sort of, what I think the purpose of life is, like learning that lesson every time, because it's not just one time you learn it. It's like continuing to learn it, continuing to realize friends and enemies are trying to teach you that important lesson, and they have a lot to teach you with every interaction. So we get to learn it every day, every time, and we get to choose. And again, if we just think, oh, we should just choose that, but not have the real reason why, then we kind of get a little lost. Like we're sort of like lost until we kind of realize that was the reason.
I just finished reading this book last night called Wanting.
Mm-hmm.
And what I loved about it so much, I think I'm going to have to do a whole podcast episode on this because it was, for a long time, I've like really struggled with this kind of this tenet within Buddhism of that suffering is tied to our desires. So like by our wanting things, that is what the craving is what ends up causing suffering for ourselves. And the man who wrote this book didn't really address it from like this Buddhist perspective, more so from this understanding of that as humans, we look to others to tell us what we want. So we look at what the popular consensus is. We look at people who are in positions of authority who are all telling us that these are good things to have. That's the messaging that we're getting. And what he was talking about in this book is like, how do we shift from what we are getting from our culture, what we're getting from people who are selling things, what we're getting from celebrities to tell us what we want? How do we actually drill down beneath that to say, is that actually what I want? And how do I cultivate the awareness to understand what is going to actually be most fulfilling to me on a deep level? And so to be able to like differentiate between what he calls thin and thick desires. So the thin desires are, they're very
superficial.
They're very superficial. Yes, they're like paper thin, and they're tied to what everybody else is telling you. And the thick desires are the things that are most intrinsic to who we are, that are going to sustain through the rest of our lives and bring us deep satisfaction and joy. And so what I hear you're saying is like that it's really important to be able to establish self-care practices, and not just like self-care, but like what we know is actually good for humans, to establish these practices to get back in touch with what those thick desires are, what those deep desires are, a connection to our sense of purpose. And I think one of the best byproducts of becoming in tune with our purpose is that it becomes easier for us to say no to things that we know are not for us, because saying yes to everything is a lot of times what contributes to burnout.
Absolutely. Like we get overwhelmed. How can you not if you say yes to everything? You
Yeah.
really have to go back to kind of like sitting down or whatever however you want to do it, writing down if you're not clear, like what are your core values? What's important to you? Because if you're not clear on that, then you're kind of going to be like that bag just in the wind, just flopping all over the place. You really have to know, what's important to you so that when somebody tells you, oh, can you do this? You're like, no, thank you. at this time I don't have time for that, or I won't be able to do it. But like maybe also, how about you ask Susie instead? She may want to do that. Like deflect it to somebody else, so you also solve their problem. But you don't have to take everything on and say yes to everything, and only say yes to the things that are like the hell yes, like absolutely going to do. But the things you're like, I don't know, or like, oh no, like you have to learn to say no. And as women, we have a challenging time saying no for, again, cultural stuff. That we have to be the good girl, we have to be nice, we have to say yes. Like that's crazy, man. Like, say no is the kind thing to say no and to put some boundaries. That's a very loving thing for you and for others. And to honor that when you say no, thank you. And again, you don't have to be like the big B word. You just have to be, okay with saying that. And that other person, you think, oh, is going to be disappointed. Oh, they're going to say this about me. People are going to say something no matter what. Okay. Whether you say yes, whether you say no, whether you're dressed in pink or blue or black, somebody's going to have an opinion. Okay. So like, if you're going to pay attention to everybody's opinion, like you're just going to be confused and depleted and overwhelmed again. So like, what is important to you? What do you like? Again, not by not listening to people or being rude or unkind because it's your things you like, but like you have to know what you want. And I also see that a lot in women. Like you ask them, like, or even humans, like they always tell you what they don't want. Well, that's great. I know you don't want to eat burritos today, you don't want Chinese, but what do you want? And I think that's a very important skill too for children. It's like, don't tell me, I'm like, what do you want? Tell me what you need right now. Like, what is it? And like learning that skill so that they are confident saying what they need, without feeling weird, all this stuff about it, shame, guilt. I don't know what the people label it with and smother it with. It's just tell me what you want. That is an important skill. Because if you don't tell people what you want, how do you think they're going to know that? How can they please you? I mean, like, forget, like, even sexually in a relationship or intimacy, but like just in everyday life. And then that translates into like real intimacy and then maybe in the bedroom. But like, as a urologist, I mean, like, intimacy does not start in the bedroom. It starts outside the bedroom, understanding, having that conversation, that acknowledging your, like, first voicing what you want, acknowledging the other person, like listening truly, coming to a compromise, letting go of the ego, and just really having a conversation. And then in the bedroom, that's where the sparks fly. But it's not going to spark when outside the bedroom there's not of this trust and communication and all those things happening. So it's like this skills for anybody. Yeah.
Do you see, I have a question that's specific to urology, and then I want to go back to a broader,
Sure.
a broader question. But do you see a lot of sexual dysfunction as a result of a lack of emotional connection?
Absolutely. I mean, and I've lived it. I mean, it's like not even like what was taught in the book, because believe me, it's not taught. Like when you come to a urologist, which, the ones that do specialize in sexual dysfunction or libido issues and all this, they probably will give you like Aldi, like the medication, which is new, like for libido and this and that. And that's going to be helpful. I'm not saying it's not. I'm not saying there's not a role, but absolutely. If you don't have that connection, like that's going to cause like the problems for women, but for men, I mean, for both. And it's amazing how when that changes, like your libido goes through the roof, and it has nothing to do with like any pill or anything else. So a lot of the stuff I do, I mean, young men too. Like, I mean, there's other reasons in the young men. Usually it's actually a huge problem, which nobody wants to talk about, but like porn-induced erectile dysfunction is real, super real, devastating. It actually caused a lot of depression and suicidal thoughts and suicide. And there's a lot of like guilt and shame. Again, just forget the AD, just porn, right? So, I mean, there's a whole discussion about that. But, if you don't address the fact, because they're going to be so ashamed to say I'm watching porn. But if I don't ask my patients, like, well, how many hours of porn do you watch a day? They're never going to tell me that. And we're never going to get to the solution of their problems with erections at 25 years old. So I need to ask those questions in a non-shameful manner, and like an open-ended question, not like, oh, do you watch porn? Because they're going to be like, no. Because that's a yes or no question. I have to ask, like, how many hours do you watch? Like, leave it open for you to tell me the amount that you feel comfortable telling me the amount, because I normalize, that, how many hours, So how we ask things is so important, because we'll get different answers. Just like if I ask somebody, oh, did you take your meds? Oh yeah. I'm like, they didn't. And I said, oh, did you have a chance to start the medication we talked about? It's sort of like a kinder way to ask the same question, but I get a lot more honest answers than if I said, oh, did you take it? Because everybody's gonna want to please a doctor. They don't want to like say they didn't do their part. So they're going to lie, not in a bad way, but just because we're humans. We want to be liked and applauded. And so if you say you didn't do what you did, like, yeah, it doesn't work. So how you ask things is really important too. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff again that comes from understanding the shame and understanding like the communication that can lead to a lot of dysfunctions of all kinds of things, obviously sexually, but in many, many things.
I'm really curious what is the correlation between erectile dysfunction and pornography?
Oh yeah, I mean it's actually you know a lot about this, but it really has a lot to do with the dopamine pathways. So when you watch porn or or any kind of like addiction at this point, but you really are now causing the dopamine pathways to just be depleted.
Hmm.
So before, like if you're having sex with your partner, I mean, there's the whole, the touch and the smell and then the looking. And I mean, it's a longer process. Of course, you could have 5 minute sex, but, it's a little bit more of a process and it takes time. And, that dopamine gets to build up and then there's a, release and, blah, 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 and there's a bonding hormones, all that. But it's sort of like the process and the timing is a little bit like say slower. Now when you're watching porn, it's like boom, 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 like so fast, so fast, so
Hmm.
fast. And like of course it's like you can watch it so quickly, so often. I mean, you could never have, sex with your partner like 8 times in one night. Some people may, but it's not really that realistic. But then you're watching this maybe for hours, just keep continuing to see, the climax and the climax and the climax, and you're just depleting your dopamine. So now you're depleted and then now you feel just like a drug, any drug, and cocaine or anything, you feel the low. So now you need to watch it again. You need to watch it again, and then it starts even escalating because now it's not just maybe one type of porn. Now you're going to more darker porn types because to get that release of that dopamine. So it really comes from that dopamine pathway, and like I said, it's devastating because then it causes that depression, and then the treatment it's kind of simple, but not really. But it's yeah, stopping that, but then going back to like real people, like real connections,
Hmm.
relationships, touch, smell, like desensitizing that other pathway, sort of like extinguishing that, and then building a new pathway. So you've got to extinguish that pathway where you just get that excitement from watching, and then you've got to build those new pathways and neuroplasticity that was there before, but now you kind of lost it, and you're going to start working on like the human part of that's how I feel desire, that's how I get excited, and that's how I have a release. So it's working in that, and like again, that's fascinating. And that
Hmm.
was not taught in med school, not in residency. I mean, I literally learned this very, very recently with one of my colleagues that talks about this a lot. And like I had no idea, and I've been here a long time doing urology. So even within urology, there's some of these topics are not as wide talked about or discussed, and they're so important. There's like millions of people that suffer with this. And again, I mean, I had two patients recently, which like I missed one because I didn't ask. So he
Hmm.
kept coming like it was a third appointment, and like following the third appointment, I'm like, I asked, and then he told me, and I'm like, okay, well, this is what we got to do. But otherwise, we were both frustrated because we're not getting better. And then you just want your Cialis, which is okay, but it's not going to help the problem.
Hmm.
And the other one, I kind of knew what it was. So right away, I'm like, okay, how much more? And then it was fine. And they just feel so like validated and seen because again, there's no shame or guilt about what I'm asking. I just really want to help you. I do. It's suffering. It's awful. Like it's not your fault. We're isolated. The biggest pandemic is isolation. Is people feeling lonely. I mean, Vivek Murthy's book, the general surgeon, talking about that is a real pandemic of loneliness, and
Hmm.
that definitely affects our health, our longevity. It's that connection with people. If we kind of talk about what helps our longevity, it's connection, and we've lost that so much, and it causes so many problems.
I think what's interesting about like the conversation of in-person human connection, not just in our expression of our sexuality and sexual connection, even though that might be like the pinnacle of risk for
Mm-hmm.
many ways, for many reasons, but also in any in-person connection, there's always risk and fear there because you are so much more vulnerable. Your ego is at risk, who your identity is at risk. How do you have like tough conversations with people in your life? And it's easy to see in pornography how there's like this, it's very alluring to bypass the risk to get the reward, because in porn, no one ever tells you no. In pornography, no one is, you don't have to be worried about how your love handles look or your stomach hangs down or whatever while you're self-pleasuring. There's very little risk there. And so I can see how it can be extremely challenging, not just with pornography, but if people live so much of their lives online where they can be a certain way and manage the risk, that in-person connection can become more and more difficult as we lose the ability to just be vulnerable in real life with people.
Yeah, it makes humans very uncomfortable. Like, I think that goes back to talking about feelings. Like,
Yeah.
I kind of wrote a post recently about, it's so interesting how we're just doers, right? We're actually human beings, but we have been taught we're doers. It's just do more, do more. How are you doing? It's never like, how are you feeling? Because again, even if you ask how are you feeling, people will like freeze and panic because like, how are you gonna like share your feelings at work, God forbid, or with anybody? It's like, I'm not gonna tell you how I feel. I mean, I'll tell you what I'm doing. Oh, I'm doing good. Yeah, I went on the weekend for this. You just tell me about what you're doing. But like, how are you feeling? Like, okay, like people feel very uncomfortable with that, where you share your emotions and what's happening or what's important or what's hurting you or what you're tired about or upset about. People get uncomfortable with feelings, and they're just emotions. They're just energy and motion. Like, we hold on to them so much that they're not longer emotions. They're not moving. They're just stuck. They're stagnant. So you hold on to that grief here. You hold on to not speaking up, and then you have a sore throat because you're just never speaking up, at home, and you keep getting sore throats. Why? Well, of course, you can go to the doctor. They can give you all kinds of antibiotics. Who knows? But if you address the fact you haven't been speaking up in your relationship or in something, then that sore throat would go away because that energy that was stuck here in your throat now can move somewhere else. If you have all this other stress energy, it goes into your pelvis. And then people come to me as urologists with pelvic pain and frequency and urgency. And like, I wonder why. Okay, so if I address what's happening to you, you kind of feel better. Of course, I'm going to do all the other things, physical therapy, whatever else you need, of course, because I need to help you with the symptoms, but we got to deal with the cause. And, we have to do both. It's not just one or the other. It's not just here's a meds or here's like my talk about stress. No, we have to do both. Like, we have to be compassionate that you need something to help the pain because it's real. And, that just happens with everything. So, if we as a society just learn that emotions are okay, that feelings are okay, that we don't have to suppress, stuff them, and shame them, and ridicule them, and pretend they don't happen, and realize we're not robots. I mean, I think, people would just, I feel, not think, but like I really feel people would have less of a lot of illnesses and problems, And it kind of going a little back to the book you were saying about the desire and how that causes a lot of, not problems, but suffering. I don't think it's desire. It's the fact that once we have something, we hold on to it. It's that attachment. So I don't think the desire is bad or good. It's just once we have something, we just hold on to it so tightly that we can't let go, and that's where we suffer. And that can definitely be our identities or our roles or, our things that are temporary. Like, oh, I'm a doctor. Say I can't operate now, then people have like a midlife crisis now. They're like, oh, I'm not a doctor, I can't operate. Who am I? Oh, I'm not a mom. Like, whatever it is, like these things that happen in our life when things change, in all our circumstances, then we have a big crisis. Like, who am I without this role? Who am I if I'm not X, Y, or Z? And that is a spiritual question. And like, who's the true I am? And I am not, like, part of my like meditation is like, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind. Who are you truly? Because people have a hard time understanding that, because but it's actually a little simple. Like, I'm not the body, because if I lose my arms, who am I? I'm still, the I am is still there. If I lose both legs and my arms, I'm still like the same I am. So who is the I am? It's not the body, and it's not the thoughts. So it's just realizing the true I am. And like, you can all think about which one it is or what it is, but we have to kind of think about that, I think, at some point, because that will help us, realize that, again, that pain, that suffering is in the attachment of the false I am. And when you are rooted in the true I am, then there's not as much suffering. And I'm not saying, yes, there's going to be pain and ups and downs and grief and all that. That's part of life. We also want to get rid of all the negative things, but like those are part of life. It's not all bliss and candy and lovely. I mean, there's a lot of pain, but we're the only reason you're going to stop and do something different is if there's pain. If there's not pain, you're going to keep going the same way. So pain is our teacher. Feelings are our communication system, from the soul to tell us we need to pay attention to something.
I want to go back to when you were talking about when you experienced burnout the second time, that there weren't big things in your life that changed. Like your job stayed the same, your marriage stayed the same, you still have kids, same house, all that. And I want to know, like, what practical ways does your life look different now than it did then? If on the outside, maybe it looks like nothing changed.
Yeah, I mean, so I used to like read like Facebook newsfeed like for hours before going to bed or when I woke up, and that is so inflammatory. I mean, it really, I mean, that's how clickbait, right? Like it challenges your emotion, and the emotion is fear. Like in any news or any article, like you can say the same article, but if it doesn't induce like, what do you mean? Or like, how can they do this? Or like, like so much division, that the fear, that's what really fuels people to look and click. So if it's like lovey-dovey, nobody's going to click on that. We only click and put attention, and it narrows our focus when it's like stressful. And that's what stress does in a healthy way. When stress is there, it's like a narrowing energy. It like focuses you, because if you're stressed, you're like, okay, I need to focus on this. How are we going to get this done? But it becomes so abnormal that when it's chronic, and like you really, that love is like opening and it's like inviting and it's like, okay, let's talk. But like when it's fear, it's like this. So, I stopped doing that because that's not helpful, and it just incites my adrenaline, cortisol levels, and it didn't help. That was huge, and I was like picking up people's energy and fear that was not even mine, but definitely I had plenty of my own. So I got rid of that, and again, I just really started practices to help me process the emotions. And for me, it was writing, and it could be very different for other people. It could be music, or it could be some other creative outlet. But we have to have a creative outlet, whatever it means to you, to process emotions, to to be creative helps you just be in awe and wonder, like you're like, oh, maybe I should start building this thing. You're like, oh yeah, and like you get excited. Like you gotta get rid of that fear and low energy and anger, and like get to something lighter, like creativity and excitement. Like that's a very different energy. It's lighter, it's funner, it's bouncier. It's like, look at your kids. Look, kids are that energy. They're excited, they're like bubbly, they're not like, they're not like that. So if you forget, be around kids, because they're very good teachers. And so I'm going to change that. I started writing, which I never had. I published things, and through writing, I began then to go on podcasts, and like reach out to other people. And people call it vulnerable, but it's not vulnerable to me. It's just me sharing my feelings. But for people that write on LinkedIn or wherever, it's kind of my public diary, and people feel like, wow, you're so courageous, you're so vulnerable. I'm like, I don't know about that. I just need to process my emotions, and so I need a place to do so. And if I can do it here, and it can help people, and it can bring the people that just like you, like which you taught me, I'm so grateful to you. When I saw your tagline, like allergic to superficial conversations, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, I need to put that on me, because that's what I want. I don't want transactional. I don't want superficial, those things like your book said. I don't want that. That doesn't nourish my soul. So I want to connect with people that nourish my soul. So part of the things that I do is talk to people that nourish my soul, that are deep conversations. That's important for me. It doesn't have to be for you. That's okay. But find the things that are important for you. So I go through the things that are important for me. Sometimes I get a little too excited, and it's not good or bad, it just is. But I need to channel that energy. So then I need to like run or dance or do something to channel, because otherwise I'm like, like that's not helpful when you're like a little too bouncy. So I need to do things for me that help me, whether it's running, dancing, things like that, like yoga. I've done yoga for 20 years, and it's not like, oh, you should do yoga. No, it's not the asanas, which are the poses. There's a whole component that is spiritual from yoga. I mean, the asanas or poses are like a tiny bit. And I will admit, I didn't know about this for many, many years, decades actually. until I learned the other parts of what yoga is. And yoga means union or yoke, or to unite, and unite with, again, the higher source. So it's about finding ways and tools to, again, unite, to see that interconnectedness in all of us. Let go of the ego that I'm better than you, that there's fear between us. And when you let go of that, you let go of the fear, you like tap into love. And like love is the strongest frequency there is. It's the strongest bond that can break all things. All things can be repaired with love, everything. And it's like about love and surrender. And surrender can have many connotations, but it really is about realizing, like, sort of, you also can't do it alone. You have to kind of look to that power to help you, especially when you hit rock bottom, like I did in Burnout and things like that. Like, what else? Where am I looking? And like, funny, like you always look up, right? What's up for most people? It's like some type of God, source, light, universe, whatever you call it. So surrendering that you need help, not just from a higher source, and actually asking for help, from angels or whoever you like to call upon, ancestors, I don't know, but also with each other. We have to help each other. You can't do it alone. So we have to ask for help. We have to be able to receive it, and be willing to kind of break a little bit. But there's also like this beautiful Japanese ceramics, the art of kintsugi, I think it's called. Like, there are these beautiful ceramics that break, and then from the broken pieces, and they like mold them like with gold, and they make this beautiful masterpiece. So after we all break, which we all are going to break at some point, the gifts that come from that and the beauty, it's really, really, just like really worth it. But we don't like to go through it, but it's on the other side of that rainbow, there really are a lot of gifts.
Yeah, who would want to go through that? It sounds terrible. So when you started to change things in your life, and you saw not just a reduction of the symptoms that were so distressing, but just that they're not there anymore, at what point did you realize that you wanted to help other physicians also manage or avoid burnout?
Yeah, it was through when I was trying to figure out, like, because I wanted to quit my job and get out of medicine. Then I was like, what am I good at? What can I do in this life? Like that, those are spiritual questions, actually. What's my purpose? How can I use my gifts? So I was trying to say, what are my gifts? What can I be good at? And so I started learning about coaching. I became a life coach because I wanted to use the skills in some point, and instead of just getting coached, can I use those skills in something? Maybe, I don't know. But as I went through the process and the training, you have to practice with other people these skills to get certified. And then I thought, okay, well, if I'm practicing and people, my colleagues, are suffering, why don't I just use these skills in a greater way and help my colleagues? And so I founded this platform to help other colleagues. And then I started speaking about it and writing about it. And again, I'm no expert at that point, but I really like dove deep into like reading everything I could. I mean, apart from experiencing it, because it's not just, there's a lot of people that, oh yeah, here for burnout. I'm gonna say people like, I'm not saying like because I have the scars, I have them any better, but like the scars are real. They're there. And all I'm saying about my scars is like, I just want to give you the courage and the hope that there is another side to it. That's the only reason why I'm going to show you my scars. Not because I'm like, oh yeah, I'm better. No, it's like, I just want to show that there's another way. Like, you don't have to be suffering and have pain and like reflux and headaches and a breakdown. You can live joyfully and happy and with purpose, but something has to change. Like, you have to decide it's time. You have to decide that's enough pain. That's enough of whatever's happening. There's enough disconnect in your family and how you treat patients or whatever your role is, that something has to change. And it's only when people in their own journey realize it's time, like it's time, and then you get help, but you need to realize yourself that. And so I'm not going to change people, but hopefully I can just remind them. Can I remind you? Can I sort of like crack the little, like, you're worthy. You matter. You're so important. Like, your gifts are so many. Please, like, look at them and realize like your light, your worthiness. So I think that's like my big message of like, hopefully I can just remind you. Hopefully I can inspire that, like, it can be done. Like, we get inspired by people all day. Like, they're doing that. You're like, wow, that's amazing. It's sort of like, instead of getting jealous and getting bitter and getting this ugly energy, like, celebrate that. Be like, that's amazing. I can't believe they did that. Maybe I want to do that. Maybe you don't want to do that. So then don't worry about it. But instead of like attacking people and saying like, oh, I can't believe they got that car, you like be like, wow, that's amazing. I hope you really enjoy it. That must be wonderful that you have this new car. Like whatever it is for you. Like we have to celebrate people instead of like knocking people down. It's very easy to find the dirt in people, but like, can you find the gold? You know, can you find the gold in people? And that's a like nicer skill to have. Everybody can find the negatives, but like let's find the gift in people. Let's find the light. Let's really support each other.
I think that's a natural byproduct of finding it in yourself, and sometimes it does take getting to rock bottom where you're like, why have I continued to live in a way that is so destructive to myself? Whether or not anybody else can see it, it might be obvious to other people by really self-destructive behaviors, but sometimes there are people who are just living lives of quiet desperation where it's destructive on the inside. Nobody else can see it for through any number of relationships or commitments that you've made or choices that you're making or things that you're not saying. But if you're slowly kind of dying on the inside, it takes a conviction of worthiness and a connection to a greater purpose and connection to love in order to change that attitude towards ourselves, to start taking care of ourselves. And the natural outflowing of that is that we then start to see other people, like you said, like we stop seeing the dirt and we just see the gold. And we want to take care of people in a way that is so compassionate and so tender that we want to be good listeners because we've learned how to be good listeners to ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's like the lens that it is neuroplasticity at like the basic 101 stuff. I mean, like it's neuroplasticity, which means those neurons that fire, like that fire together, like stay together, kind of thing. Like so. And it's just like if you are pregnant, like when you're pregnant, you start noticing everybody's pregnant. When you're looking for that truck, it's like, oh, every time you go on the freeway, I'm like, oh, I saw the truck again, because you're paying attention to that. You're seeing the world through the lens. So how are you seeing again yourself? What's inside of you? Is it anger or is it like love? So if everything's anger inside, you're gonna see all the anger. You're gonna reflect that. It's gonna come back to you. It's just gonna be like this whole thing because it's all from anger. But when you can be in a place of calm, of joy, of love, like everything looks fantastic. Like I'm not trying to paint like toxic positivity glasses, but it's just like it's gonna color the way because you are paying attention to that. It's sort of like I think it's Zig Ziglar said the more the more grateful you are, the more you find things to be grateful for. So gratitude practice is not just woo woo foo foo lufu. It's like it is doing that neuroplasticity so that the more you're grateful for, which is a practice, very good practice to do. That's one of the things anybody can do to get out of the burnout state, because stress and gratitude cannot coexist. It's one or the other. It's like oil and water. They don't really mix. So instead of being in stress, how about you practice gratitude? In the morning or at night or whenever you do it, like write out what you're grateful for today. Like, thank you, life or universe, or just thank you for, like the fact my sheets were clean, or like we had enough food, or, I got this promotion, or my best friend called me and I'm so happy, or like my puppy is not sick anymore. Like whatever it is, like the more we pay attention and cultivate those pathways, the more we see all the amazing things in the world. And again, it's not saying that there's not bad things. There's plenty of it. But like, why do you want to focus on that? You on one of your podcasts, you say this most beautiful analogy about the grapes, and it's so beautiful. Like when you have that grape bunch, like instead of picking all the mushy ones, pick the good ones. Why are you picking the mushy bad thoughts? Why are you picking all the negativity? Of course, we can pick it and eat it, but do you want to ingest all that negativity? Do you want to ingest all that toxic news? You could, but like, why? Why are you choosing to ingest not only mentally, psychologically, emotionally, like physically, even like food, things that are going to harm you? Choose the stuff that's going to nourish you. And it starts from every aspect: spiritual, psychological, physical, food wise. I mean, like you got to choose those things. I mean, you can choose anything you like. That we have free will to choose. It's up to you. But why? Why would you choose the other?
I think often we choose the other because we're told that that's what we should want. That's what we should choose. It's like if the norm is, like you said, to spend hours scrolling on Facebook before you go to bed. And we have technology and people in, positions of power that are saying that's normal and that's what we should be doing. Then until we slow down and start asking ourselves, like, how are these things actually making me feel? And unshaming our fear, unshaming our feelings, and telling the truth about the results of the behaviors that we have in our lives and the things that we think about. If we're honest about it, then that's when you can start to change things.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to also just being human. Like, we don't want to be out of the tribe. So if you're out
Yeah.
of the tribe, you're not the one doing all this stuff, and it's like, it's very scary. Like, you don't want to be the one not doing it. But then you have to be okay with like being that sort of like not a lone ranger, but like being okay just being you, like the unique you that doesn't want to be the follower for everything. You have to, like, there has to be a little bit of leader in you, like you're like, no, like I want to do it this way because that's true to me, and because you know your gifts and you value like what's important to you, and then people actually will love you for your uniqueness. They're gonna be like, oh, and like if you are you, then the people that resonate with you will find you because you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm just the same, or I love that. But if you are just being something you're not, you're gonna attract all the people that are like whatever you're being like, and maybe not be truly what you like. So that's why it's important to like know thyself, heal thyself too, but like know thyself, like who are you, what's important to you, have you written down again what are your core values, and like are the people in your circle in the same core values? Is honesty an important value for you, and are you around people that lie or like sometimes cheat or like gossip or whatever it is, like is that people in your circle? And if it is, well, do you want to stay there and then you're gonna like die slowly in your soul because it's eroding like your true nature that's important to you, or and like you're gonna tolerate it, that's okay, or again, are you gonna start aligning your circle, your environment, to be one where it's aligned to you? And then you're going to notice when that is aligned, it's like a whole different place. But it takes courage to drop, let's say, that relationship, that friendship that is dragging you down, is not any way in your frequency. It can be challenging. But if you don't, then what? Then what? How long are you going to have them drag you down, have them kind of forget like your like what's important to you? Like you want those friendships to value and not admire, but like celebrate your uniqueness, not shame it, not like try to change it, not try to say like, oh, why are you doing it like that, that's awful. Like you don't want that to be like your circle. You want the people to uplift you.
I don't think I've ever thought about um, evaluating our relationships from a self-care perspective. Like it could be an act of self-care and self-love to end a friendship. And that might actually be one of the more important like pieces of self-care, like way more important than a bubble bath or a massage, but from a place of like self-love and also love for the other person to say like this actually isn't a good fit for us.
Yeah, it's a loving thing to do when like again people get attached, like, oh, we have to be like we're friends for 20 years and like we're gonna be best friends forever and like we can't let go of that. It's like, well, no, like the only thing like you can't step in the same river twice. That's heretical. It's like thousands of years old like wisdom. So like things change. Like it's not always the same, and like it doesn't have to be, and it's not going to be. And the fact that we think it has to be the same, like we're best friends since we're 5, so how can we like now break the friendship? It's like, yeah, like outgrow things. Like you need to like keep going in the journey where like you're continuing to grow. Like it's like putting a shoe doesn't fit. Like why are you forcing the shoe? It doesn't fit. Like get the shoe that fits now. It's like there's nothing wrong with that. But we like hold on to it and like like we feel like, oh, how could I do that? Well, you have to do it because that relationship has like had its season, and then the seasons happen, and that's okay. Like you don't shame the tree for like having a season or not having fruits all year. It's just a season. So we all have seasons, and sometimes we have to realize that season is over and there's time for a new harvest, and it's not always with the same people or the same places. It's just sometimes time to change.
I love this visual. I think about this visual a lot because it makes me laugh so much. But this like visual of like trying to get your like baby onesie back on, like the footy pajamas, and you're like trying to cram yourself into your baby clothes again. And you're like, it so obviously doesn't fit anymore. But we have such a fear of leaving things behind that sometimes it's difficult to like, shop for clothes that actually fit you now instead of that little baby
But it's painful, right?
pajamas. It's
Onesie,
super
the
painful.
kids, like their neck is like this or crotches like this. It's like actually painful to keep the same onesie that doesn't fit. And the
Yes.
pajamas, like it's uncomfortable. That shoe that is too small, you try to wear it, it's uncomfortable. So like it's painful. So why do you keep doing the pain? It's so uncomfortable. Why? Just like I ask myself, like I'm like a little toddler, like why? And people don't like that question, but I was like, I really am curious, like why? There's something behind that. Like I'm just curious, like why? Tell me more because I really am curious, like why you're doing that to yourself.
I
You
really
know?
think that one of the most prominent features of what makes us human is that curiosity. And hopefully, the conversations that we have and the way that we live our lives can initiate more curiosity for other people. That I think, like when we were talking earlier about how fear ends up blocking us from intimacy, that the shame will block us from curiosity every time. That I really believe like there are no stupid questions. There is no downside to asking why. There's no downside to further investigation other than the downside that you might have to go through some pain when you realize that things really aren't what you thought that they were. But
And
on
this,
the other side of that, there is satisfaction, there's fulfillment, there's a deeper connection to purpose, and there's
yeah,
love.
yeah, and it's so painful. I'm like,
Mm.
we avoid it. And like, I mean, I know this. I mean, it's like personal. I mean, it's not like I'm just talking out of my butt. It's like you can avoid it for a long time. You can rationalize like why you're doing the
Mm.
things and why you're avoiding asking the question because like the pain is gonna be there and like it's like soul ripping, nausea inducing, gut wrenching pain. Like it's not easy. It's not. It's not easy. That's why people avoid it for a long time, or that's why people numb it with porn, shopping, eating, whatever you want to choose your poison, overworking. Like, so high
Mm.
achievers do this really good things called overworking. And
Mm.
especially if you're in medicine, it's like celebrated because, okay, oh, you're helping people. But like, that's how
Mm.
we avoid the conversations. We just find things to be busy with. And we find more work to do and more committees to be and more things. So we don't have to ever address the asking why or getting uncomfortable or addressing those things that need to be addressed. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat it because it's not sugarcoated. It is painful. It is like, again, like tear inducing, gut wrenching, you need to vomit, painful. But it's so worth it. And to
Mm.
have like, and again, you have to know when is your time, your journey. And sometimes there's messengers, sometimes there's angels, and there's people that come and tell you it's time. When are you going to do that? And you could have had many opportunities, and you can know it rationally that like you could have chosen love, but you don't.
Mm.
You're like, oh, there, I was not loving again, and you know it. But at some point, maybe in this lifetime or next, or whatever you believe in, whatever, maybe you'll choose to ask why, get uncomfortable, and like rip the band-aid and do some healing. And again, when you do, it's like it's so blissful and it's so much better way to live that when you have your guard up and there's contempt and there's like this energy of like, you're just like, like fighting. It's just it's not love, and then again, it's like that surrender, that love is at the basis of it, and it is love. Love is the answer.
Mm.
But it takes time because we rationalize, because we're human, and then we
Mm.
rationalize all the ways we can get busy or do other things or numb it or distract ourselves. We were very good at that. It's painful, but I think it's worth it.
Mm. Yeah. It reminds me of like why we wait to go to the doctor. Like we uh, are scared of what the answer might be, so we
Hmm.
wait. And it feels the same with these like more existential questions that we're asking. It's like I'll think about that later. I'll think about that later, and then suddenly there isn't any later, and we're then looking back at our life with regret. And it feels like the sooner that we can do some triage for our soul, where we can start to do some diagnosing and some experimentation and to ask these questions, and not be mired in shame that make us avoid asking those questions, the sooner we can get this diagnosis for ourselves, the better. Like there's more treatment options available the sooner you catch something. And it feels, that seems like a very good metaphor for what we're doing on a soul level. The sooner that you catch the discontentment, the sooner that you catch the dishonesty, the sooner that you catch noticing places in your body where you're holding on to stuff, the better. The maybe not easier it is to treat that, but you have the benefit of time ahead of you to then cultivate intimate relationships and deep friendships and honesty and vulnerability in your connections in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, it's definitely, you nailed it. And it's spiritual surgery. There's no other way around it. It is like spiritual surgery, and it is painful, and it is just what it is. It's deep. It's not superficial. I mean, we're not like it's like a little deep, like little cut. No,
little
it's gonna
dermatology.
be a little like like little superficial. It's gonna be deep, and like that's the work, right? Like that is the work. And again, people may not want to do the work. That's okay. But like if you want to do the work, I think it's worth it. And again, yeah, just like you say, it's absolutely on point. The analogy of like the doctor, like people don't come to the doctor, and especially men, unless it's really painful or there's like blood coming out of one of their places. Okay, blood. Okay, that's pretty like, I mean, it's probably blood is red for a reason. Like, hello, stop. Like, whoa, no, it's not pink, it's not yellow, it's like a red. Like, stops in the tracks. So there's something about the color red. I mean, it could have been pink, I don't know, but it's red. So if there's blood or there's pain, then you go. Like otherwise, you just wait, I'll be fine. We do that the same thing with all these things you're talking about. Like we wait, we just kind of tolerate. We kind of like, oh, it's not so bad. Oh, well, you rationalize, well, this is okay, or like, we rationalize all kinds of stuff for years, decades, decades. But at some point, you gotta like do it. Have that conversation. Rip that band-aid. Do that soul surgery. Like it has to get done.
And it might turn out better than you expect. It might be. Martha Beck has this illustration of that all of us at some point stand before a fire and we know that we're supposed to jump in. And there's two things that may happen when you finally step into that inferno. One is that, or no, three things, sorry. No, two things. One is that you might be like, oh, this wasn't so bad. This wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It's actually, it's not, yeah, it's kind of warm. It's kind of cozy in here. Yeah, all right, like I can do this. And the other option is that you're burned to ashes, that everything that you believe about yourself, your life is burned to ashes. And that's when the phoenix arises. And it's, I think that's a perfect illustration of what we're talking about is like, when we come face to face, whether it's in our physical bodies or in our spiritual bodies, which are connected, of course, when we come to these places where the fire is hot and it's getting hotter, where things are uncomfortable or painful, and we haven't been paying attention to maybe the signs to investigate further up until this point, at some point something will get our attention and we will either willingly or unwillingly step into the fire. And I think that's when many people make big changes in their lives, is when we're confronted with these situations where things feel so out of our control and we're reminded of how precious life is. We're reminded of what a tiny part of this whole microcosm we are, that we're all interconnected and that we also are somehow connected to something that's bigger than ourselves. So anytime we come face to face with that reality, we're changed. It's inevitable. We're changed. And I think what I like about the conversations that I have on this podcast is that we're encouraging people to do that willingly, to not wait until the big thing happens, but instead to take steps towards asking those questions now, to take steps towards taking care of ourselves as a whole person, body, soul, mind, spirit, that we're offering up practical ways to do the introspection and develop greater self-awareness in service of deeper connection to love with others, ourselves, and with the divine.
Yeah, but I think at the same time, like those deepest lessons have to be lived. Like we can listen, you're like, oh, that's great, and like that seems useful, or like your friend went through it, like, oh yeah, like like you can learn something. I'm not saying we don't learn anything from that. Of course, it's better than not know anything about it. Like if you tell me in a book I didn't know about it, I'm like, that's fantastic. And like now I know more. So that's very helpful. We still need all that, but then you do have to live it. And sometimes, yes, you definitely have to burn before you rise like the phoenix. Like you have to sometimes many times. We hope we don't because we're caring people. We're humans that don't want to see suffering. We don't want our loved ones to like crash and burn, but sometimes they have to crash and burn. And then we're going to be there all. It's not like we abandon people when they crash and burn. We're there while they're falling and they're burning, and then we pick them up and walk with them as they come out of the fire. So I think we just never abandon them. We just, like Ramdas says, like we just walk. We are all just walking each other home. So no matter what part of the journey we're in, we're going to do it. We're not going to abandon people. We're going to help them, walk with them and realize, like I said, we're all one. We're all interconnected. And then when we realize that, we may act a little bit different to each other from a place of love and not from a place of hate and anger and fear, because it's going to come back to us. It's a law. It's a law of karma, but it's also in any, religious text, whichever one you prefer. There's always something about, the seeds that you plant or what you do unto others will come to you in every religious text. So the one that is your favorite, use that one, find those quotes, really think about them, like sit with them and realize that they're universal truths. They're not just if you're Jewish or Muslim or Catholic. I mean, they're universal truths. And when you realize like it's the same truth. There's no difference. We're talking about the same thing. And the same thing is, again, going back to love. It's in every religious, spiritual text. They're everywhere. Yeah.
Well, thank you. We're coming up to the end of our time, but thank you for this conversation today, for taking us through thinking about our physical bodies and how our emotional and mental life affects our physicality. Thank you for the practical tips and application of what to do to avoid burnout, and also what to do when we sometimes inevitably go through burnout. And for the beautiful way that you take care of your patients. I think that I want everyone in medicine to listen to you and how you approach your patients with curiosity and deep, deep compassion. So thank you. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
And for all my listeners, before we go, P.S. We expire.